In the city centre, more than 100 prams, pushchairs and car seats have been lined up to highlight the unknown number of children killed during the invasion. In Donetsk, in eastern Ukraine, a number of people were killed after a residential building was shelled. A missile also hit a residential area in the capital, Kiev, ripping apart high-rise buildings. Former heavyweight boxing champion Vladimir Klitschko, who's in the capital with his brother, the mayor of Kiev, says his country desperately needs help.
Life is getting lost. Not just the infrastructure, life is getting lost. This is genocide of the Ukrainian population. You have to act now. Stop passively observing and stop doing business with Russia. Do it now.
Meanwhile, the Russian president has appeared at a rally in Moscow addressing the so-called special operation in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin delivered a speech to a packed stadium, thousands of people gathering on the 8th anniversary of Russia's takeover of Crimea. That as Russia today had its licence to broadcast in the UK revoked with immediate effect. Ofcom says it's not satisfied that RT can be a responsible broadcaster. With its headquarters in Moscow, the company accused the media regulator of simply being a tool for the British government and that the public's being robbed of information. Former Ofcom advisor Martin Campbell described the decision as patronising.
OK, RT, Russia Today, there is a clue in the title as to what you're going to get. And the idea that no one can put it into perspective is a little bit crazy. So, I mean, like so many things that have happened because of this invasion, it hasn't been handled very well.
More than 150,000 people registered for the Homes for Ukraine scheme ahead of today's launch. The government programme aims to match refugees with people and companies who can provide accommodation for at least 6 months. Ukrainians with a sponsor here can start their visa application immediately. Those with no ties to the country will be matched at a later stage. In other news, demonstrations are being held in Dover, Liverpool and Hull to protest against the sacking of hundreds of seafarers by P&O Ferries.
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you!
Conservative MP for Dover, Natalie Alfec, was heckled by members of the Unite Union outside Dover's Maritime House. 800 staff were made redundant via video message yesterday. Politicians and unions have condemned the move, with the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union seeking legal advice. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps told GBNews the company must sit down and talk with employees.
We understand that companies have to make money, otherwise they can't be in business. I mean, no problem with companies making a profit. And we understand that they may have to make changes. You do not treat your staff in that way. Pre-recorded, 30 minutes notice on a Zoom to tell you you've lost your job. In many cases of decades, people who've been working for P&O Ferries.
Grant Shapps there. Sarah Everard's killer, Wayne Couzens, has been charged with indecent exposure. The Crown Prosecution Service says he's been accused of committing 4 offences in January and February last year. He's currently serving a whole life sentence for the abduction, rape and murder of Miss Everard in March 2021. He'll appear at Westminster Magistrates Court next month. The Chancellor says his priority for the future is to cut taxes. Rishi Sunak says the government has been dealing with back-to-back crises and he's promised to do what he can to ease the rising cost of living. He was speaking at the Conservative Party's spring conference earlier.
You know, my priority going forward is to cut taxes. I can't solve every problem. No government can solve every problem, and particularly when you're grappling with global inflationary forces, you know, they are somewhat out of my control. But as you saw a month or so ago when we announced a very significant intervention to help people meet some of the additional costs of energy bills, you know, where we can make a difference, of course I can.
Rishi Sunak there. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to the briefing with Arlene Foster.
And welcome back to the briefing with me, Arlene Foster. Well, yet again, it's been a frantic week of news. The Russian invasion of Ukraine entered its 3rd week, with just today the appalling news that Russian missiles have hit an aircraft repair plant near Lviv in western Ukraine, a city that has become a safe haven for people fleeing the war. In better news, the release of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe brought joy to many of us across the country. And then across the pond, Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi had some, well, let's just say, strange things to say about being Irish and the United Kingdom yesterday. Well, let's bring in today's panellist, political commentator Emma Webb. Emma, let's start with the war in Ukraine. We've been watching what's been going on there, but I think Putin has been making some comments, hasn't he? He was quite irate when he gave his television broadcast, I think it was on Wednesday, and then today he's been having this huge rally at a stadium in Moscow. What do we make of what's currently going on there?
Absolutely. I think, Putin is trying to really project his power and his strength, given, under the current circumstances, there are many people who are suggesting that actually the resistance that he's faced from the Ukrainians, as well as the resistance that he's faced at home, is a sign actually of his weakness, the fact that he had to introduce martial law, preventing people from speaking up in criticism of his invasion of Ukraine within Russia, but also, as I say, the extreme fierce fighting put up by the Ukrainian people against the invasion has suggested that perhaps he isn't as strong as he thinks he is. And I think to a degree as well, the invasion of Ukraine in personal terms suggests that, Putin is trying to shore up his reputation as a strong man. He's actually getting on a bit in terms of age. And I think that this is something that is important not only to him personally as a politician, but also to, as he sees it, the reputation of Russia around the world. And so it's clear that what Putin is trying to do really is to shore up that perception of power across the globe, particularly after Zelensky said that there was no prospect of Ukraine joining NATO. So he may be seeing this as a sort of chink in the armour and a sign that concessions will be made in his direction, and so therefore is leaning into it.
And we saw there, whilst you were speaking, footage of that huge rally that has been orchestrated today in Moscow. And again, an attempt to look as if he's very strong and that actually everybody in Russia supports what he's doing. But of course, we heard that he had sacked one of his senior military commanders on Thursday, just yesterday, and talked about purifying Russia of traitors. There is discord in the Kremlin, it appears, and certainly that was the message from the Defence Minister, James Halfpenny, today.
It seems that within Putin's inner circle there is resistance, but also, as I said, we saw not too long ago within the broadcasters within Russia actually coming out and criticising what Putin was doing. So it seems that actually within the elite circles, within the urban population within Russia, there is resistance to what he's doing. And it's important for him to respond to those criticisms coming from the West that are suggesting that actually this dissent could, as some people have suggested, even go so far as to topple Putin. I don't think that we should be that optimistic that dissent is going to be enough to lead to that consequence. But I think for him, he really is facing more opposition than perhaps he expected that he would, and perhaps is finding that the Russian people are not the people that he thought they were.
Well, certainly the speech on Wednesday would suggest he's pretty desperate to get a hold on his people again, and surely for a man of his sort of dictatorial tendencies, any sort of dissent at all will be something that he'll look upon with the reaction that we've had. He sacked one of his senior military commanders.
Absolutely, and this is, as we've seen with Xi Jinping in China, harking back to Chairman Mao, Putin is really looking back to his antecedents and even through the invasion of Ukraine and for his territorial ambitions, it's quite clear that he wants to recapture areas of the former Soviet Union. And that's something that is, as we saw in the leaked document of the leaked statement of victory, his vision is very much aligned with this idea of a new Soviet Union. And that says something about his attitude. And obviously, he's going to therefore want to crush absolutely any dissent. But it also suggests a weakness, because it suggests that even domestically, his misinformation campaign, his fake news campaign of propaganda, isn't being perhaps as successful as he thought it would be, bombarding the Russian people with these ideas about the denazification of Ukraine and the threat posed by NATO, that perhaps that isn't actually having the cut through, because the Russian people are not the Russian people of the former Soviet Union. They are people who for many decades have had access to the internet and know what's going on around the world, and perhaps will not be as easy to silence and suppress as he thinks.
And so we heard from him today talking about the special military operation, as he calls the war in Ukraine, and the fact that he was marking the 8th anniversary of the annexation of Crimea. And Crimea is a salutary lesson, surely, for the West, because of the way in which we reacted then. And I think the PM this week was reflecting on that. Actually, we have a situation as we do have now in Ukraine.
Absolutely. And I think that we shouldn't see what is happening right now in Ukraine as being an isolated incident. This is something that we have seen a build-up to, not only with respect to Russia, but also China. So we allowed Russia to annex Crimea and didn't respond robustly enough. We didn't answer appropriately to Russian aggression over the last 10 years, not in Georgia, not in Crimea. And then over Hong Kong, we have essentially allowed the Chinese to exert their influence there as well, which puts Taiwan at risk. And so what we're seeing, I think, is the potential for not only a new geopolitical realignment with Russia and China in a much closer relationship, but also a kind of feedback loop where we see, for example, as many people have suggested, that China may invade Taiwan. We saw China putting out a statement describing the invasion of Ukraine as an invasion, but saying quite clearly that they thought that Taiwan was different because they say Taiwan is a domestic issue. And what we're seeing there is a clever rhetoric. They're suggesting, as Putin believes himself, that Ukraine is essentially a domestic issue because he believes it should be part of Russia, that actually we should be concerned about that statement from the Chinese, that actually it suggests that they are willing to invade invade Taiwan. They buzzed aircraft over not too long after the invasion of Ukraine. And so I think we should be seeing this not in isolation, but recognising that the West and our allies, the US particularly as well, and NATO, have actually failed to exert and to project our power. We've shown ourselves to be weak against Russian and Chinese aggression, and that this is the consequence.
Or indeed go back to Afghanistan as well, Emma.
Exactly.
We should talk about that as well. But look, there's been some really good news this week about the release of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, and I'm going to talk to a guest later on about that, and you'll be here for that discussion. But I just want to talk about the politics of this, because there are some people saying, how much did we pay to release Nazanin and her compatriot as well, the businessman whose name I just don't have. Oh yes, Anishi Azuri, who also was released at the same time. And some people are saying we paid a ransom. Is that how you see it?
It's a huge sum of money. I understand the concerns there. Generally speaking, it's not wise to pay the ransom because it encourages kidnap either by terrorist groups or by states. In this instance, we're paying back an historic debt that for an arms deal that didn't go through at the time of the Iranian Revolution. And obviously this is something that is politically contentious. I'm actually not sure what I think of this, because I think it's really excellent news that Nazanin has been released. She was clearly being used as a political pawn in order to try and get this debt back. And so in that respect, it's excellent news. Should we have paid this money to Iran, given that Iran is such a destabilising force and has been such a destabilising force in the region, and also to do so at a time when we're, as I just described, facing so many threats from real aggressors, real enemies of the West in Russia and China, and also Iran. We shouldn't forget that Iran has been an historic enemy of Great Britain.
Yeah, of course, Number 10 are saying this payment was not contingent on freeing either Nazanin or Anush Azuri, who's the businessman, the elderly businessman who was released at the same time, and that the UK has never accepted that our nationals can be used for this sort of political purpose. But even some of their own members, Tom Tugendhat, for example, has said that it is perceived to be a ransom. So that's something surely that will be of concern.
This is something that her own MP had raised in Parliament previously, because and her husband had said so as well, that that in conjunction with the debate that was ongoing around this payment of this, as the Iranians put it, an historic debt, that had resulted, whenever there had been a negative consequence in those discussions, that had resulted in negative consequences for Nazanin and her family. And so it's quite widely known that the situation with Nazanin was very much dependent on this debt. And so in a sense, it is a ransom in everything but name. And I think that Tom Tugendhat is right to say that that is the way that this will be perceived, because it shows, as I was saying before, about the projection of weakness to the West's enemies, that they can succeed in using British citizens or dual citizens as a pawn in their international politicking. And I think that that is how it will be perceived by some. But as I say, I'm not going to criticise the payment, because I think it's an excellent thing that as a consequence, it seems that Nazanin has been released.
Yeah, absolutely. And then across the pond, we have the wonderful Joe Biden, the president at the moment, and Nancy Pelosi, the speaker. And of course, this has been St. Patrick's Day. And you may not realise this, Emma, but anybody from the island of Ireland goes to America for St. Patrick's Day. It's a bit Irish in and of itself that we don't actually stay at home for the celebrations. But I'm going to throw to a little clip now of, I think it's the president that we're going to see. And this is what he had to say.
The hard-won gains of peace in Northern Ireland. The Good Friday Agreement has been the foundation of peace and prosperity in Northern Ireland for nearly 25 years, and it cannot change. I have made that point, and he's a friend to the Prime Minister of England and others. It cannot change.
So there we have a 15-second piece from President Biden in which he makes two huge blunders. First of all, he says that the Belfast Agreement cannot be changed. It's been changed on a number of occasions, most notably by the St Andrews Agreement of 2006. And then he goes on to call the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom the Prime Minister of England.
Should we be surprised?
I could go on. I have to say. But I think we're going to go to the weather, and maybe it's just as well.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. Lots of sunshine around today, and there's plenty more to come over the weekend, although it will be a little cooler on Sunday, and there will be more cloud around on Sunday too across parts of eastern England. But high pressure is sitting pretty close to the country, and it's not really shifting very far very quickly, keeping the weather fronts at bay, so bringing largely clear skies through the evening. A bit more of a breeze picking up overnight tonight. Now that'll have two impacts. It means it won't turn as foggy overnight, although we could see a little bit of mist and fog where the winds remain very light over parts of northeast England. And it also won't be as frosty. Now, don't get me wrong, still feeling pretty chilly out there this evening, and by dawn temperatures down to 3 or 4 Celsius, but generally hovering a few degrees above zero. On to the details for the weekend. Yes, a fresh start to Saturday. There will be some mist and fog and low cloud over northeast England, but apart from that, it is pretty much a blue sky day. Lots of sunshine around through Saturday. More of a breeze across England and Wales, certainly compared to today, and that will make it feel a little cooler. But look at the temperatures, well above average. Top of the shop, probably the Highlands of Scotland, 19, 20 Celsius here. Cooler, though, with that breeze, quite noticeable on those eastern coasts. That will become even more noticeable by Sunday. As we go through Saturday night, again, if you're heading out, be prepared for temperatures to drop quite sharply. It will be quite chilly once more. The winds perhaps easing off a little bit across Wales and southwest England as we head into Sunday. Maybe a touch more in the way of frost on Sunday morning. But generally, it's another fine and sunny day, certainly across much of the west. We will see more cloud on Sunday for southeast England and East Anglia, and the chance of 1 or 2 showers in East Anglia on Sunday afternoon too. But for many, it's another dry and bright day, but it won't be as warm. Temperatures still above average in the west and creeping into the teens, but certainly feeling pretty fresh on those eastern coasts. Single figures likely here. Goodbye.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here.
Joe Biden walking out.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties. But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it. Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
So welcome back to The Briefing. Well, it's the Conservative Spring Conference in Blackpool this weekend, and with suggestions that Prime Minister Boris Johnson's position has improved from the dire straits he found himself in recent months, we sent GB News political correspondent to Blackpool to test the mood amongst the Tory party faithful. Earlier, Tom spoke to Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, who had some strong words for the management of P&O after their abrupt layoff of 800 employees just yesterday. But first, following Mr Shapps' declaration in his speech earlier that he wanted Britain to become the largest economy in Europe, Tom asked him how he expected to make that happen.
Well, infrastructure is a big part of that, skills, education, the things which build an economy are the things which make everybody in that economy have opportunities, that makes them productive, that builds a bigger economy. It's that simple. You know, Britain has always, been obviously geographically a limited amount of space. What's been the difference for Britain in the past are our people, and that's the difference that we can have again if we bring this all together.
Now, you said that there'd be 96 billion in terms of infrastructure, in terms of railway infrastructure spending, but that northern leg of HS2, that's not going ahead.
So 96 billion is just the rail investment, and that's only the rail investment in the Midlands and North. There's other rail investment, there's other road investment, and much else besides. So this is an enormous sum of money. No government since Victorian times have done anything on this scale. And you talk about what's happening in the North. Manchester, for example, will have not one but two high-speed lines because of HS2 coming in from the south, and then a west-east line from Warrington, Manchester over to Yorkshire. So there is huge and ambitious plans, you'll be able to travel from Manchester to Leeds in just over 30 minutes. At the moment, that journey is probably 55 minutes. Liverpool to London, cut by 40 minutes. So this is massive investment. Don't listen to those people who say, oh, 96 billion's crumbs off the table. That's an actual quote from a Labour mayor. I mean, 96 billion pounds. That's what they think crumbs is? Goodness help us.
No one's doubting there's significant investment and improvements going ahead. Was it wrong, therefore, to speak about even more improvements beforehand that had to be scaled back a little bit?
Well, no, first of all, I just want to tackle the idea that we're not delivering on what we said we were going to do. We're going to have a high-speed kind of system that will run from London to the northwest. It will also cut a lot of time off journeys along the east coast and to, for example, to Leeds, up to Scotland. So we're going to deliver, and we're going to deliver it in the biggest way any government has ever done. We're still going to run HS2 trains to Leeds, for example. I keep reading that we're not. That's not true. We said we are. We're about to undertake a study to get them there. So HS2 trains going up the eastern leg to Leeds as well.
Now, moving on to the passenger locator form, you spoke in quite an ideological way about how you hated the sort of paperwork, papers, please society. That's been abolished this morning. Can you guarantee it will never come back?
4 a.m. this morning. I should have woken up. I have to confess I was asleep. I should have woken up to celebrate the moment. I hated that form. Asking people, where are you going to come when you get home? When will you be leaving your home when you get home? These are things which are normally no business of the state, and I really never want us to have to go back to that situation. I don't know what will happen with coronavirus or viruses in the future, but I hope the enthusiasm with which I've scrapped it and the government scrapped this form indicates it's not in our hearts to go there if we can possibly ever avoid it.
Now, one of the biggest round of applause for you came from your condemnation of the owners of P&O, their pre-recorded Zoom message, that mass sacking. Was your problem with the way it was done, or the fact that a company is restructuring at all?
Well, we understand that companies have to make money, otherwise they can't be in business. I mean, no problem with companies making a profit. And we understand that they may have to make changes. You do not treat your staff in that way. Pre-recorded, 30 minutes notice on a Zoom to tell you you've lost your job, in many cases of decades, people who've been working for P&O Ferries. So yes, it's partly the way in which it's done. Mainly, they've got to sit down. Right? In my constituency, I happen to have some of the supermarkets headquartered, the HQs, and sometimes they have to pull back depending on market conditions. They sit down. They consult with the employees. They understand and assist them into new roles. I've seen none of that from P&O. I think the management of P&O Ferries have taken really two of the proudest initials in maritime history, P and O, and turned it into P-off.
Should the government step in to make it right?
Well, there are laws in place to deal with these sort of things. So we're, first of all, I know the unions, I know the workers, and P&O are making sure that the laws have been followed, number one. Number two, I want to still see I think that P&O Ferry management can still rescue this situation. They can get around the table and talk to those individuals, and I want to see them do that. And number three, I'm asking my officials to identify, for example, whether we have government contracts with P&O Ferries. I don't know the answer to that yet, which could be looked at in the light of all of this. So I think this is a long way to run yet, and I want to see those workers who have given their lives in many cases to P&O Ferries properly rewarded. And one final thing, my phone has been ringing with offers from blue chip company bosses, I mean names that everyone knows, who want to employ those people. So they won't be out of work for long, that's for sure.
Well, Grant Shapps, thank you for joining us here on GB News.
Thanks, Tom.
So there we are, that's Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, giving us his views on what's going on with P&O and also posing as a latter-day Isambard Kingdom Brunel, talking a lot about infrastructure as well. So with me is Emma. Emma, what did you make of what Grant Shapps had to say?
I thought it was interesting that he harked back to the Victorians, as you say, pasting himself as a kind of Isambard Kingdom Brunel, because the big difference, I think, between Britain now and Britain in the Victorian period, and he said that one of the differences as a small island nation is the people here, is that this country lacks the self-confidence that the Victorians had, and that's something that is important in terms of getting the economy booming. And I think that's something that is missing from their vision. You can have all the infrastructure in the world, but if you don't have the self-confidence as a country, you don't have that confidence to inspire people to be entrepreneurs as we had during the Victorian period, then I'm afraid that it's not going to go as far as they think it is. And whilst I agree that it's good to have investment in infrastructure, particularly in the north, I think that's something that has been it was really long overdue. I think there'll be many people asking questions about how this is actually going to translate into real impact, because that's something that obviously for a very long time we've heard them talking about things like the Northern Powerhouse and haven't really seen much effect in people's daily lives.
And of course he mentioned P&O and made that joke that he wanted to make about P&O. But it is a very serious situation when 800 people learn about their future in the manner in which they did.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually agree with Grant Shapps entirely. I think that it's quite clear that they will have known for a period of time before they made that announcement that they were going to have to do that. You don't simply decide on the spur of the moment that you're going to have to restructure your company. And so whilst, as he said, it's absolutely fine for companies needing to restructure, prioritising their profits, of course, but just dumping this suddenly on your staff, people, as he said, who have worked for the company, possibly even for decades, at a time when people as well are really struggling with the increasing burden of taxes like the national insurance hike, and again going back to talking about the economy and getting the economy booming, with people's living costs going up, partly because of the government's resistance to scrapping green levies. So people are really struggling at the moment, and I think that just simply dropping that on your staff is a completely abhorrent thing to do, but very good if they do actually, as he suggested, find jobs elsewhere.
Well, Emma, I'm sure we'll come back to this in the next half hour, but stay with us, because after the break we'll be discussing Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's return to the UK and the Northern Ireland Protocol. But first, here's the latest news with Rihanna.
Thank you, Arlene. It's 3:33, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Ukrainian president says Russian forces are blocking humanitarian corridors to Mariupol. Rescue efforts continue in the city after a theatre was hit by an airstrike on Wednesday. So far, 130 people have been rescued from the site. Meanwhile, in the city of Lviv, more than 100 prams, pushchairs and car seats have been lined up to highlight the unknown number of children killed during the invasion. Russia today has had its licence to broadcast in the UK revoked with immediate effect. Ofcom says it's not satisfied that RT can be a responsible broadcaster. With its headquarters in Moscow, the company accuses the media regulator of being a tool for the British government, saying the public is being robbed of information. In other news, demonstrations are being held in Dover, Liverpool and Hull to protest against the sacking of hundreds of seafarers by P&O Ferries. 800 staff were made redundant via video message yesterday. Politicians and unions have condemned the move, with the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union seeking legal advice. And the Chancellor says his priority for the future is to cut taxes. Speaking at the Conservative Party's spring conference, Rishi Sunak said the government's been dealing with back-to-back crises. He's also promised to do what he can to ease the rising cost of living. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. The briefing with Arlene Foster will be back in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the show. This week, after being detained in Iran on trumped-up charges for almost 6 years, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe finally returned to the UK and was reunited with her husband and daughter. Her return signifies the end of a traumatic ordeal which saw Nazanin being falsely accused of espionage and thrown into jail in Tehran. After robust diplomatic efforts and tireless campaigning from her family, led by her husband Richard, she was finally allowed to return home to family and friends and, of course, freedom. Joining me now to discuss this news is Anna Diamond, who herself was detained in Iran on spying charges and was a fellow inmate of Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe, and now campaigns against hostage taking. Anna, it's wonderful to have you in the studio this afternoon. And I referenced there in my introduction that you yourself were held in a jail in Iran. Tell us a little bit about that and how long were you kept in Iran?
Absolutely. Yes, so much like Nazanin, I went to Iran in the summer of 2014 to see my distant relatives, and they took my passports at the airport. They said that they were going to investigate more into my case, and I didn't know what that investigation entailed. And then fast forward a year and a half, during which I was under travel ban, so I could not exit Iran. I was formally arrested January 2016. So this was about 4 months before Nazanin was arrested.
Yes.
But we were both in the same prison, in the same solitary confinement unit.
And what age were you when you were first arrested? What age were you?
I was 19 when I went to Iran. I was on my second year of undergrad degree. So yeah, it was a lot to take in, I think. And also I had a relatively normal upbringing in the UK. So going to Iran and facing such hostility for no reason, it was quite a big shock for me.
And you had dual citizenship, isn't that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
From Iranian from your mother or father's side, from your father's side?
Both of them are Iranian.
Right.
I mean, we do have, so my great-great-mother was actually an English missionary who went to Iran. So we do have ancestors who are English, but regardless of that, my parents were Iranian, and so they detected an opportunity right there, and I essentially ended up becoming like a bargaining chip.
Yeah. And I mean, horrific. I was reading about Nazanin's experience in jail today. Pretty horrendous stuff. I mean, you were in solitary confinement as well, weren't you, Anna?
Yes.
And how was that? I mean, was it as scary as we would think it would be? You were only 19 at the time.
I know, yeah. I mean, absolutely. It was scary. I think for the most part because you are told that you are forgotten and like nobody knows you are here. Nobody cares for you, nobody is following up on your case. I think the idea of being so isolated and just out of anyone's touch or knowledge was what was scary. And initially, what happened was I was kidnapped and it was a forced disappearance. So I was not allowed to call my relatives, my family. Nobody knew where I was. And that kind of exacerbated all the more the terrifying feeling that I had.
And do you think the reason why they had captured you, if you like, is because you were quite politically active here in the UK before you went over to Iran?
I think that was used as an excuse.
Yes.
So they found all these photos of me, being very active with the Conservative Party and being a spokesperson for the Conservative youth, and they just put the dots together and fabricated this whole case of me being like an advisor for David Cameron and then later on being recruited by MI6, which just did not make any sense, especially because when I got involved with the Conservatives, I was 15, 16.
Yeah.
So how could you become a special advisor for the Prime Minister at that age? Just didn't add up. And also I know, now looking back, I just know that they knew I wasn't this big spy they were making me to be. And I think that's what makes it so unjust, that they knew and yet they still did what they did.
Yes, and I was reading Nazanin's recounting that the prison warders knew that she was innocent.
Absolutely.
But yet she was still remaining in prison. And one of the things that she's having to cope with now is learning to live with freedom. When you came back into the UK again, was that a challenge? Did you find it difficult to readjust?
Yes, so I think it's worthwhile to mention that Nazanin, her case is so unique, and because she's such a public figure now, her readjustment period will probably be quite different to most other hostages.
Sure.
She has had members of parliament, everybody really caring for her, which is quite rare. I mean, most of the time, and this is very sad, and this is what we're trying to change with the alliance that we have created with Richard and Jason Rezaian and other hostages, that these people who get falsely accused of espionage and national security charges, they wouldn't just end up being cases and numbers, that they're actually human and they should be cared for.
And it's interesting you mention that, because I think a lot of people have missed the fact that it wasn't just Nazanin that came home on that flight. It was the elderly businessman, and I do want to get his name correct, Anousheh Azuri?
Anousheh Azuri.
Anousheh Azuri, who was 67 years old, and his family have said that they didn't think they got enough traction with the public in the way that Nazanin did. Not taking away from her campaign, which of course was excellent, but he was 5 years in captivity as well.
Yeah.
And there are other people of dual nationality still in captivity, isn't that right?
Absolutely. So when I was transferred from the solitary confinement to the public ward for a duration of about 30 days, I got to meet a number of dual nationals that I did not even know were in prison. There was a lady who was an Iranian French diplomat, so she was working in the French Foreign Ministry, and nobody knew that she was there. And then I met a Cypriot Iranian, a Danish Iranian, and I'm just like, where have you guys been?
Yeah.
And it really highlights this big issue that not every case makes it to the public light, partially because the families might not want to do, might not give consent. And in other circumstances, it's just the fact that they don't have the right resources, the right campaign leads, or the governments are trying to keep it quiet and kind of choose the silent diplomacy route, which sometimes works and sometimes does not.
Well, I think it's very interesting, actually, because I think a lot of people out there will think it's just a one-off. Nazanin's a one-off, but actually she's not. And that, to me, is the huge story, actually. Emma, I'm sure you would have a view on that too, the fact that there are others in captivity still.
Yeah, I would suggest that we don't know the full extent of this problem. If, as you say, if there are people who are imprisoned and no one knows that they're there and there's no public information available about this, you will end up with a situation where, and like you said, it's fantastic that Nazanin's campaign was such a success, but where those people who, for whatever reason, perhaps for the optics, are not as appealing in the public mind, that those people are essentially just abandoned. And it's frankly, I think, crazy that there isn't more public awareness about the fact that Iran is doing this to dual nationals from all countries around the world, not just from Britain.
And just very briefly then, to finish it off, tell us about the organisation that you're a part of that campaigns on this issue.
So we're called the Alliance Against State Hostage Taking. It is, until now, I think Richard will probably withdraw a bit and just kind of focus on rebuilding his family. But we tend to, whenever families come forward and when they want to talk about their cases, We discuss, the strategies they want to take on and how they want to approach making the cases of their families that have been arrested. Yes. If they want to go public or if they want to remain on a more kind of anonymous profile. And we just take it from there. We have so far been quite successful in, bringing these cases to the public light through campaigns, through discussions in the UK Parliament, Congress, UN, European Parliament. But I must say that, the heavy lifting has really come from Richard. Yes. I think he is such a well-spoken man, very personable and very, very media savvy, and just knows how these things are run. So I think the fact that Nazanin got out and, she's well as you can be coming out of such an ordeal, I think it's really all thanks to him and also to our diplomats and Liz Truss. I feel like she does not get enough credit.
Well, certainly the Ratcliffe's MP was very keen to point out that Liz Truss had been instrumental in that. Anna, thank you so much for coming in. I hope I'm not patronising you when I say I think you're a fabulous advocate as well for the organisation. So thank you very much for coming in. So this week was a landmark legal case in the row over the Northern Ireland Protocol. The Court of Appeal in Northern Ireland gave its verdict saying that Parliament did not act in breach of Article 6 of the Act of Union 1800 by keeping Northern Ireland within the EU single market for goods. In fact, the Northern Ireland Court of Appeal ruled that Westminster's protocol legislation suspended Article 6, giving the protocol legal precedence. In Parliament this week, the protocol faced backlash from Conservative MPs and unionists after wording in customs legislation tried to put Great Britain rather than the United Kingdom into our legislation, effectively excluding Northern Ireland. So what does this all mean for the future of the protocol, Northern Ireland and the Union itself? Joining me now to discuss this from Westminster is Conservative MP Steve Baker, who this week criticised the government's wording within that very legislation that I've referred to. Steve, thanks for joining us from Westminster. Were you surprised with this sleight of hand, if I can call it that, in terms of trying to remove UK and put instead Great Britain?
Well, Arlene, thanks very much for having me on. Thanks very much indeed. I think I was surprised that a better political filter hadn't been run across this particular piece of delegated legislation. It very plainly substituted Great Britain where United Kingdom can presently be found. And that, of course, is politically extremely sensitive for unionists. And it particularly highlights the problems of the protocol. So the minister argued that it was technical. Really, the case that I was making is that it was politically, it highlighted that we have not yet fixed a protocol which is not working. I think now even its defenders accept that it's causing just the kind of problems which were foreseen when the protocol was written. Of course, we agreed to the protocol under duress. It's time to change it.
In terms of the protocol under duress, you'll recall at the time that some people said that they viewed the protocol as a temporary solution. And indeed, the Northern Ireland Court of Appeal made reference to that insofar as they said it was drafted as if it was meant to be temporary. Actually, I think the wording they use is not meant as permanent. Given that is the case, there is surely a need for Article 16 to be triggered, is there not?
Well, there is, and I'm afraid that Article 16 has been talked up far, far too much. If people actually read the text, which is in plain English, they are limited and temporary measures to make sure that problems which were foreseen could be dealt with. And instead of talking that article up, we should be actually explaining to people that it's perfectly reasonable in the circumstances right now for us to use it to make sure that, for example, major retailers in GB will return to supplying Northern Ireland. You know, I was in Belfast a couple of weeks ago. People were telling me of really major retailers who simply refuse to ship to Northern Ireland, and that can't be right. So I think it's perfectly reasonable and actually could be done in quite a low-key way to use Article 16 now to make sure that the border down the Irish Sea is removed for the purposes of goods staying within Northern Ireland. I think potentially we could legislate for what's called mutual enforcement. That should give the EU, even if they don't agree to it initially, that would give them the reassurance that within Northern Ireland we were going to apply their standards to anything shipped to them. And we could therefore end up in a position where actually we could get rid of the border down the Irish Sea and in a sense restore the Belfast Agreement's East-West provisions, which you'll know you'll know better than me that the Good Friday Agreement applies east-west as well as north-south, and I'm afraid too many people have been forgetting that. I don't think Putin and the threat of violence can be any excuse for not getting on with it, and certainly we should get on with it before the elections.
I absolutely agree with you. I think Article 16 was put into the protocol for exactly the sort of circumstance that unfortunately has transpired. And you'll know very well that a command paper put out by David Frost at that time last July very clearly said that the circumstances were there to trigger Article 16, diversion of trade, the fact that it was causing economic hardship in Northern Ireland and was causing political problems as well. But David had said at that time he wanted to try and find a solution through consensus. I think most of us could understand why he would want to do that, Steve. But it seems to me that the European Union want to dress Article 16 up as some sort of psychodrama that can't possibly happen, when in actual fact it was put there for the very purpose that we're now in.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So I think we should engage in some quite careful diplomacy. I think it is serious to use Article 16. It's not trivial, but it's not huge either. But I think we should just now get on with doing what is necessary to resolve the protocol from our point of view. Use Article 16, legislate domestically, and say to the EU, table text, this is what we should always do in negotiations, table text and say this is what we'd like to do, this is how we'd like to change the protocol to make it work. And then negotiate on the basis that we're proactively tabling what we would like to see change. So that's what I do. I think really it's three phases. First, negotiate, try to agree everything mutually. Secondly, act within the provisions of the protocol using Article 16. And thirdly, if we really had to, if the EU refused to negotiate, I mean, we're trying to have a good faith partnership here, but it does take two to tango. In the last resort, we should be willing to repudiate the protocol, because in the end, we did agree to it under duress. We tested the UK's constitution very nearly to destruction in the Brexit process, I'm sorry to say. We need to leave all that in the past. It would be far, far better if the European Union just worked with us in good faith to as you say, reform the protocol in a way that was envisaged and make sure that the East-West provisions of the Belfast Agreement are respected.
Finally, Steve, there have been some reports in the Times, for example, that Liz Truss is getting ready to trigger Article 16 before the Northern Ireland Assembly election. In a couple of words, do you think that might happen?
Well, it might well happen, and I think Liz would be very well advised to do that. I think it's very important that Liz and everybody else in Parliament remembers that there are those of us who aren't going to rest until the protocol's resolved. I don't think Brexit is fully done until the protocol is resolved. And so, therefore, of course, I hope that Liz does get on with it and move towards a resolution in good faith.
Steve, thanks so much for joining us as ever, and
You're welcome.
We'll catch up again in the future. Thanks a million.
You're welcome.
So, Emma, that was Steve Baker talking to us about the protocol. To be fair, he has always taken a huge interest in what happens with the protocol. But unfortunately for people in Northern Ireland, we've heard about Article 16, as he rightly says, being triggered on so many occasions. It's now losing belief, if I can put it like that. People don't believe it's going to happen anymore.
It's the boy who cried wolf.
Absolutely.
And I couldn't possibly agree with Steve Baker more. I think this is exactly the circumstances that Article 16 was intended for.
Sure.
The fact that this situation has even been allowed to transpire in the first place, as you say, exchanging the words United Kingdom for Great Britain is frankly abhorrent. It's more than politically insensitive. It's a constitutional threat. I think that unionists in Northern Ireland and also in the United Kingdom as a whole are absolutely right to be outraged by this. I think the fact that the Northern Ireland Protocol essentially exchanged the single market within the United Kingdom for the integrity of the single market in the European Union was something that should never have occurred, that this was an unwise setup in the first instance, and I absolutely think that Liz Truss would be right to trigger Article 16.
Yes, so do I, but we've been here before, unfortunately. Emma, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed your time. We certainly have enjoyed you being with us to commentate on the big stories of this afternoon. But I'll be not back this week. I'm taking a week off next week, and you've been watching this week The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, and the show's back next week with Tom, I think, at 3 p.m. Up next, it's Nana Akua.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. Lots of sunshine around today, and there's plenty more to come over the weekend, although it will be a little cooler on Sunday, and there will be more cloud around on Sunday too across parts of eastern England. But high pressure is sitting pretty close to the country, and it's not really shifting very far very quickly. Keeping the weather fronts at bay, so bringing largely clear skies through the evening. A bit more of a breeze picking up overnight tonight. Now that'll have two impacts. It means it won't turn as foggy overnight, although we could see a little bit of mist and fog where the winds remain very light over parts of northeast England. And it also won't be as frosty. Now, don't get me wrong, still feeling pretty chilly out there this evening.